BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. And hello, everybody. Today is Monday, another Zodiac Monday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? I hope everyone had a good weekend. In this episode, I will be revisiting Arthur Lee Allen as the prime suspect in the Zodiac killer case. I will be talking to you guys about a brand new Zodiac suspect, and I'll be giving some updates on the White Horse Killer saga. And I'll share the smallest update right now, and that is that both of the books that I have written, Killer on a White Horse and Down the Dark Lane, are now available on YouTube for free in their entirety, 100% free. There are two playlists that have been made for Killer on a White Horse and Down the Dark Lane, and if you just need to pass some time throughout the week, or you just want to check out something different on YouTube, I invite you to visit those playlists. And before we truly get started, I would like to remind you guys that this episode of Zodiac Monday is brought to you by Capital One. If you sign up for the Capital One Quicksilver card, you will get $200 as a sign-on bonus. It's like getting free money, and there is a link in the description box as well as one pinned with the quick reference. But I want to get to the heart and soul of today's episode first. And firstly, I'll say that the Zodiac Killer was a serial killer who operated in California in 1968 and 69. Whatever happened before or after that is still part of the mystery. The prime suspect in the Zodiac case is an individual named Arthur Lee Allen, who doesn't need much of an introduction. He was featured in the 2007 Fincher film about the Zodiac Killer, as well as in countless documentaries, Robert Graysmith's book, although he was referred to as Robert Hall's star. And I would like to give a shout out to Vincent McConnell, who sent something into the Facebook page. My personal Facebook is in the description box. And Vincent says, "Dear Black Box Online Radio in care of Ned Dahan, thank you for reading my most recent letter on your show. I would like for you to read this letter on Monday's Zodiac Killer News Report. A large body of work exists, spanning many decades of analysis of the handwriting of Arthur Lee Allen. In recent months, Interested02, that's someone's name, has done some of the best work regarding Allen which I have ever read. It was his post on Tapatalk called Did the Zodiac Make a Mistake, which first planted the seed for me that Allen is in fact the author of the letters which followed the shooting at Blue Rock Springs Park, historically attributed to the Zodiac Killer. However, in my opinion, the best chance to prove that Allen was the Zodiac, which I now believe, lies more in forensic linguistics and phraseology. A little background on me. When I was 16 or 17 years old, I was involved with cybercriminals on an IRC network called Anon Ops, associated with what our culture knows as Anonymous. From a young age, I thought to prioritize and pay attention to an individual's style of speech, with only their written or typed works as my reference. I firmly, as of now, believe that based on my increasing familiarity with Allen's written works in other areas of his life, Arthur Lee Allen is the author of the three-part 408 cipher and the debut of Zodiac Letter. It doesn't matter what the handwriting looked like. Go back and look at every lowercase d, k, and r on this letter. What is far more telling is the structure, style, and vibe of those letters. It can be argued that the Zodiac had more quote-unquote wit than Allen, but my personal hypothesis is this discrepancy involves psychoactive chemicals. I will leave it at that. Anyway, I have so much to say about Allen that I'll go ahead and conclude here. What I will say is that I urge everyone to locate and analyze deeply the personal correspondence and writings of Arthur Lee Allen. Pay no attention to the stylification of the font, but instead look at the constituents of the sentences, their finer details and their variety and similarities. Thank you, Ned, a concerned citizen." And thank you so much, Vincent, for sending that into the Facebook page. Firstly, I think that forensic linguistics can be very valuable because in the Jack the Ripper case, which I also follow, there was a forensic linguistic analyst named Dr. Andrea Nini who looked at the Jack the Ripper letters. And she made some very interesting observations. For example, she's looking at word combinations like have to and been with. Those are just the first things that came to my mind. They're not actually examples from the letters, but very simple word combinations from the English letters, from the English language. And she showed how certain things in the Jack the Ripper letters could indicate that one person was writing multiple correspondences because they're clustering the language together in a particular way. So I absolutely think that it's a good method to try and find out which suspect wrote which letters in the Zodiac case. Now, I mean, would you look at somebody like Arthur Lee Allen's personal writings, compare those to the Zodiac letters, but not look at the penmanship? Everybody zones in on the penmanship. Look at the word choice. I think that this is something very good that I'm going to be exploring in future letters. But I do have a couple comments to make about Vincent's letter. Firstly, this thing about the Zodiac was on psychoactive chemicals. I think you just mean drugs, like high on drugs at a certain point. And I'm really not convinced that the Zodiac killer was ever a drug user, or definitely not a drug user when he was creating the Zodiac letters and ciphers. Definitely not the ciphers. They seem extremely precise and very neat. And even the Zodiac letters, I think, they have a lot of work that has been put into them. And I mean, I think that perhaps he was very clear headed when he was creating all of that, no matter whom the Zodiac killer was. The next point from Vincent's letter says that the Zodiac had more quote-unquote wit than Arthur Lee Allen, like some type of funny intelligence. I think that no matter whom your Zodiac killer suspect is, this could be explained very simply by saying that the Zodiac was in character. It was a persona that had been created. The Zodiac is not exactly using his exact personality into the letters. I think elements of his personality could have found their way into the letters, and that's what people try to do, and that's even what I think Vincent is talking about with these forensic linguistic choices. However, I do think that the person who created the Zodiac Killer wanted to make a persona that was going to almost have his own voice. And I left a comment once on the Nancy Drew channel. It was on one of the posts that was made by the guy who runs that one, and he was just asking some questions about the Zodiac Killer, and I just said that I thought the Zodiac created a persona and he was in character, everything that I just shared with you. And the Nancy Drew guy responded by saying that he thought that it was a persona that the Zodiac built upon and expanded over time. Absolutely, I think that that was true. Now, the Zodiac is saying all these things at the beginning, that I am collecting slaves for the afterlife. I'll be reborn in paradise, and those whom I have killed will be my slaves. That comes from the very beginning, from the 408 cipher. One of the first things that the Zodiac Killer mailed, as we already said, the Zodiac mails the debut letter and the 408 cipher in July of 1969. And then we have things that are built upon this persona, because the Zodiac doesn't only say that I'm collecting slaves, this is what's important to me. The Zodiac is also saying that he's then going to go on and build bombs and detonate them. He then says that he's going to target school children and go after school buses. So there are elements to the Zodiac's persona that are definitely different and reshaped in a different way throughout the letters, and just more expansive. How about taking credit for the Kathleen Johns incident on March 22nd of 1970? Kathleen Johns was abducted off of Highway Route 132 with her infant child at the time. That is also something that is very different than the previous Zodiac crimes. No matter if that was the Zodiac or not, the Zodiac definitely took credit for it, saying, I gave a ride to a woman and her baby a couple months back, or however that was phrased. So I completely agree that the Zodiac is building upon this persona. And if you can think of any other good examples of that, you can put your ideas in the comments section down below. And I also wanted to look up some other details about Arthur Lee Allen, because there appears to be a very big divide in the world of Zodiac research, and that relates to how and why people choose suspects. Some people are absolutely convinced that the Zodiac killer had a very high level of education, a very high understanding of the math and science fields, and other people think the exact opposite. They think that their suspect is someone who was uneducated, someone who didn't have formal education, but he read a lot of books on his own, and he's pulling stuff out of things like comic books, or maybe even from other sources like magazines, more or less different types of pop culture sources. With Arthur Lee Allen, where does he fall into the category? Well, of course, I remembered a line from Robert Graysmith's book when he talked about how Arthur Lee Allen had a high understanding of chemistry. I wanted to find the exact details about that, so I went over to ZodiacKiller.com and looked at the page, the Arthur Lee Allen Timeline. And what it says is, from 1970 to 1974, Arthur Lee Allen attended Sonoma State College, Majoring in biological sciences with a minor in chemistry, he completed all academic requirements in 1974 but did not receive his Bachelor's of Science degree until 1981. During Allen's stint at Sonoma State, the Zodiac murders apparently ceased. However, the Sonoma co-ed killings began. According to retired Special Agent Jim Silver of the California Department of Justice, if you mapped out where the co-eds were last seen, they would later be found dead. Allen's trailer would be directly in the center. Now, this is one that I'm going to have to explore in the future, the Sonoma co-ed killings, but I do want to come back to something here. Firstly, Arthur Lee Allen doesn't get his degree until 1981. He would pass away in 1992 from cancer, so he didn't get many opportunities to use that. And you guys might be noticing, Arthur Lee Allen is majoring in biological sciences with a minor in chemistry. Now, he definitely would have been older than a typical college student at the time. And all of that stuff, 1970 to 1974, that is after the Zodiac murders took place. The Zodiac crimes were in 1968 and 69. And I'm going to share something, and this is purely an assumption on my part. Maybe I shouldn't even do it, but I think that Arthur Lee Allen would have had a high understanding of chemistry, math, and biological sciences well before going to Sonoma State College, because if he's already in his 30s, then he's going to have had a lot of familiarity with these subjects. And I would expect, again, this is an assumption, that someone at that age is going to be exposed to a lot of things in that they're choosing to major in for a college degree. That is just my take on the subject. But yes, Arthur Lee Allen did have an understanding of math, science, and chemistry, so he is somebody who kind of fits into both categories. Like, people are saying their suspect is uneducated, and other people are saying that their suspect had to have had advanced education. The Zodiac had to have had advanced education, like Gareth Penn was all about this. And other people who accused Ted Kaczynski of being the Zodiac killer, like Douglas Oswell, I mean, they point to all types of mathematical clues, saying Ted Kaczynski had a PhD in mathematics, and someone would need like a master's or a PhD to create the Zodiac persona. Well, Alan is really quite in the middle, because he's definitely someone who is very awkward, a social deviant. He can't hold down jobs very well. The thing that's right above this, on the Zodiac Killer timeline, is just talking about how Arthur Lee Allen was working at a gas station before that for about 6 months, and then he got fired. He is somewhat of a job hopper, and he's also been reported to be bothering children, not only at the Valley Springs school where he worked at, but even at that gas station. There's a line about that here on ZodiacKiller.com. And I just want to go back to that, actually, because this is April 4th, 1969. Again, I'm just reading from the timeline. Arthur Lee Allen was living back home with his parents. Allen was terminated from his part-time job as a gas station attendant in Vallejo, where he worked for approximately 6 months in Okay, that sentence is finished. Then, in August 1971, Allen was described by his former employer as being undependable with a drinking problem. In addition, he was said to be interested in small girls. So the events took place in 1969, but that story was not told to someone until 1971. I hope that was very clear. But I think you can get the idea that Allen had a problem with pedophilia. And the reason why I don't think that Arthur Lee Allen was the Zodiac killer is I just don't see any evidence of the Zodiac being a sex offender. That's one of the reasons, anyway. Not to mention, he matches some of the physical descriptions and is also completely in complete contradiction to other parts of the physical descriptions, but please share your ideas in the comments section down below. And in this episode, I said that I was going to be talking to you guys about a brand new Zodiac killer suspect, and his name is Mike Klein. His full name was James Michael Klein. And there is a new website out there that is going to be discussing Mike Klein as the Zodiac Killer, and it is called ZodiacKillerX.com. One more time, ZodiacKillerX.com. It is run by Angela Blevins, and her suspect is Mike Klein. Now, I'm going to be very honest with you guys. This is not a my daddy did it type of suspect. This is something a little bit different. Mike Klein was actually her stepfather, and she came on to this in a different way, so I would hope that people will approach this with an open mind. A lot of people instantly hear something about looking at a relative, and they think, nope, absolutely not. There's no way that that method will ever work. I try to give everybody a chance and evaluate the facts, again, with an open mind. And what happened was, Angela began to suspect some suspicious things about her mother's death. Her mother passed away from cancer, but she began reading about symptoms online, and she began to think that it was quite possible that her mother had been poisoned, and that her cancerous sickness could have been the result of a poisoning, and she suspected that her stepfather, Mike Klein, was responsible. So she began just reading more and more about different things involving poisonings on the internet, and coincidentally, in around 2005 2006, the trailer for the movie Zodiac, the David Fincher film, started airing. So then she began to look at some possible connections, just seeing what would happen if Mike Klein could have been the Zodiac killer. And she found that there were all types of connections to California and San Francisco. Some of them she knew about, but she's learned a lot since, and she's posting her findings on ZodiacKillerX.com. And I want to be very clear about something. Mike Klein is currently alive, and I am not accusing him directly of being the Zodiac. I am only responding to the material that has been shared on ZodiacKillerX.com, someone else's website. But there are some very interesting things that Angela has created with the timeline. Firstly, Mike Klein was born in 1948. In February of that year, he would have been 20 and 21 at the time of the Zodiac murders. And he was in the Navy. First, he was in Chicago, but he got very sick. Then he went to San Diego and he got sick again. He was hospitalized both times. He spent a large portion of the 1960s in California, and the Zodiac Killer committed the first murder on December 20th of 1968 with the Lake Herman Road murders. And in Angela's theory, she believes that Mike Klein was in the Bay Area, which she can document. He committed those murders, and then we have a 6 or 7 month gap in Zodiac activity. It's not until the July 4th of 1969 that we have the next crime taking place. And her explanation is that Mike Klein left the Bay Area and he went back to Dallas, Texas. And he wasn't from Dallas, he was actually from Arkansas, but he went back to Dallas, Texas for about 5 months and he got a job with a telephone company. And again, that is not theoretical, she can document that. So he's working for the telephone company for about 5 months. Then he leaves and he returns to the Bay Area in the summer of 1969 before the Blue Rock Springs shooting. And during the entirety of Zodiac activity from then on, all the way until 1974, we're talking the summer of 1969 all the way to 1974, Mike Klein is working in the Bay Area. At the time of the Zodiac murders, he was a delivery driver for Levi Strauss, like the jeans company. And she believes that he would have used that as an opportunity to become very familiar with the back roads of various places in the Bay Area, various places in Northern California. And then, from that point onward, he would have even had access to sewing machines with the clothing company, which could have been used to create the Lake Berryessa hooded costume. And I know you're going to need something a little bit more than that, but again, this is how she's trying to piece together the events. And someone who is working for a clothing company could have created the hood that was worn by the Zodiac Killer on September 27th of 1969. And also someone who is working in a clothing warehouse would carry an X-Acto knife regularly, which again she reports that Mike Klein did. And that could have been used to cut the shirt owned by Paul Stein on October 11th of 1969, which then would have been mailed in with several Zodiac correspondences. And yes, there are other ways to cut a shirt. Lots of people could have carried knives. Lots of people would have had access to sewing machines. But with Angela's theory, what she's doing is she's trying to put things into place to show that Mike Klein would have been thinking about this stuff. Working for a clothing company, here's an opportunity to make an executioner style hood, always carrying that knife because you have to cut things on the delivery truck and in the warehouse with fabric, so that's why the fabric was cut on Paul Stein's shirt and the piece was mailed in. Mike Klein is a very different type of suspect because I was just talking about Arthur Lee Allen's education, and Mike Klein had a rather different form of education. He went to 4 years of college, but he didn't graduate with a degree. And what Angela had shared with me is that he actually ended up getting he passed a program from Penn State about gardening, and I even looked it up because I wasn't completely sure what she was talking about. I was like, is that like a college degree, associates, or a certificate? It turns out that Penn State has a training program about gardening, and he also passed a program through his employer from Arkansas. I'm not going to say their name, but I'm sure you could guess it if you had to try. And as stated, Mike Klein was originally from Arkansas. He lived in Texas as well as in California. And as I said, he's in California from 1969 to 1974 during that second stint. After 1974, he goes back to Arkansas and he receives some money from his father, and he actually ends up running a framing shop, and he had that for about 10 years. And Angela has explored a lot of different possible crimes that could be connected to Mike Klein, including her own mother's death. But there are some just very bizarre stories about how and why this guy was behaving in his way, because let's look at some deviant behavior associated with Mike Klein. For example, his granddaughter, this is well into the future, his granddaughter moved to Anchorage, Alaska, and she became ill. She fell ill. So Mike Klein flew up from Arkansas to Anchorage, Alaska, and then he actually contacted multiple people from Arkansas from a religious community to come up to Anchorage, Alaska, and perform an exorcism on his own granddaughter. And I was just thinking, well, I mean, at the time, I didn't know if Angela was writing a book or not about her findings. I was just thinking, you have some very enormous stories that, I mean, definitely would kind of sound like the pages out of a thriller or something like that, this Alaskan exorcism stuff. But what she's trying to do is to show that he was a social deviant, he was a bizarre individual, and he would often break the rules, kind of the Machiavellian personality that weaves around the rules of society as opposed to following them, or just he's a very different type of person. And he's even been confronted by another family member about these accusations of being the Zodiac killer, and she simply says that he runs away from them. And I was somewhat reluctant to talk about Mike Klein because, as previously stated, he is still alive, but what Angela said was anytime he gets confronted about things, he just simply runs away and does not try to engage with it. And I will state one more time, Angela has launched ZodiacKillerX.com. These are all of her observations and her findings. And one additional crime that I've never explored before that could possibly be linked to the Zodiac Killer is a crime that took place in Arkansas. And again, this is part of Angela's theory. She believes that her suspect, Mike Klein, committed the Zodiac murders in 1968 and 69, but also committed the 1989 murder of Dana Stidham, Stidham. And to help us out, I'm going to go to an article called Community Searches for Hope 35 Years After Local 18-Year-Old's Murder. And this was written by Spencer Bailey of CBS 5 News, just citing the source. Centerton, Arkansas. As the Benton County murder of a local teen remains unsolved decades later, those close to the case are working to keep it alive. It's been nearly 35 years since the disappearance and murder of Centerton 18-year-old Dana Stidham. While it's unknown who's responsible for her death, local law enforcement and community members say that they haven't forgotten about the incident. Dana disappeared on July 25th of 1989. She lived with her father, Larry, and her cousin, Christy Smith. Dana had gone home to visit her parents, Lawrence and Georgia, in Hiwassee earlier that day. She left the home around 2:45 p.m. to go to the Phillips grocery store in Bella Vista, just a quick 4-mile drive away. Dana left the store at 3:17 p.m. It was the last time that she was seen alive. According to a report from the Benton County Sheriff's Office, Sergeant Danny Varner, a family friend, received a phone call from Larry at around 9:15 p.m., reporting his sister missing. Varner got a description of Dana and put out a bolo, or be on the lookout, from the sheriff's office around 9:43 p.m. that night. The next morning, on July 26, Karen Myers of the Bella Vista Sheriff's Station located Dana's vehicle on the side of Highway 71 near Wellington Road in Bella Vista. The car was a gray 1984 Dodge Omni. Detective Sergeant Mike Sidorak joined Varner in surveying the area after the vehicle was found. Soon after her disappearance, the two members of law enforcement interviewed an individual named Danny Mitchell, the boyfriend of Dana's. He was cleared. On September 17th of 1989, the body was found. 2 months later, the body was found in a shallow grave in Bella Vista. On September 17th, Varner was contacted by dispatch and informed that Benton County Sheriff Andy Lee wanted all criminal investigations and personnel sent to Bella Vista and the sheriff's office. And one detail that Angela has shared with me is that Dana's body was dismembered and the bones were actually found in a very neat pile. I don't know if that indicates that somebody moved the bones later on, but the only bone that was missing was her sternum, or like, let's just say that. That actually ties into one theory that her last name was Dana Stidum, and that was almost leaving a clue that the killer knew who she was, Stidum, Sternum, and I kid thee not, that is something that people do think about, and even I would have my own types of curiosities about that, because sometimes serial killers do explore those types of behaviors. But one more time, you can visit ZodiacKillerX.com if you want to hear more about Angela's observations. And right now, I'd like to turn it over to you guys. What do you think about Mike Klein as a Zodiac killer suspect? Again, he was somebody who was ex-Navy, lived in several different states, from Arkansas, living in California and Texas. Other points about Mike Klein is that the reason why the Zodiac killer persona would have been created was because of astrology. That was something that he was very connected to. And some people think that the Zodiac was more about astronomy, and they would be like Michael Cole, author of the Zodiac Revisited trilogy. And people more like Angela Blevins believe that it was about astrology, like we have the 12 signs of the Zodiac. And that was something that Michael Klein explored a lot. And on ZodiacKillerX.com, Angela has written something out here about what was the motive for the Zodiac murders. And no matter whom your suspect is, or even if you don't have a suspect, what was the motive for the Zodiac murders? Did this guy really want to commit murders so that he could have slaves in paradise? When he dies, he'll be reborn in paradise, and those who he has killed will be his slaves? I don't think so. I don't think so for a second. I think that that was all made up. The motive that she has written out here is, according to the Zodiac, he controls all things. And that was just it. He wanted to commit a crime spree and create this serial killer name purely to be in control of it. And I'll share some things about that in just a second. But right now, I would like to get to your supporter shout-outs on BuyMeACoffee.com, as well as from the Super Thanks on YouTube. And I have a special announcement. Every week on Zodiac Monday, I tell you guys that you can support this channel at buymeacoffee.com, buymeacoffee.com/blackboxned88. That allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show, and anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday, right? I know some people who lost their home in a house fire, and if you make a donation this week, I will send it to the GoFundMe page that has been set up for their for their tragic incident, actually. So again, some people whom I know personally. I was actually the first person to donate to their GoFundMe page, but again, if anybody makes a donation on buymeacoffee.com, I will then make a donation to their GoFundMe page to help out some people who are going through a hard time. And our first supporter on BuyMeACoffee.com this week is Batman66. Batman66, thank you so much for your regular and consistent support. And as I said last week, Batman66 has really been helping with the creation of the YouTube shorts and the reels that are aired on Facebook and Instagram. And I can't thank him enough, because they are shared in different places, and a lot of people have been checking out the reels. And I'm going to talk a lot more about that in a new journal episode that is going to come out soon. I did 2 West Virginia vlogs where I was just sharing some experiences about BBOR, living in West Virginia, on the channels. And not this week, but next week, I'm going to bring those back. And there's a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff with BlackBoxOnlineRadio that I'd like to talk to you guys about. Batman66, thank you one more time. And the next one is from River Prawn Pottery. Also, another big thank you for your regular and consistent support. You two guys are absolutely amazing, and it really does mean a lot to me that you want to support Black Box Online Radio regularly. And one more time, if anybody makes a donation, I will then make a donation to the GoFundMe page to help some people out. But I want to get back to some things that I've been exploring, because the last thing that I was talking to you guys about is, what's the Zodiac's motive? He wants to be in control of all things. And on the last several Zodiac Killer news reports, I told you guys that I've been reading the book The Sociopath Next Door by Dr. Martha Stout, and it explores all of these concepts about why would someone go on to become a serial killer? Why would somebody like the Zodiac go on to become a serial killer? And one point that has been shared is that some people can differentiate themselves from other people in an empathetic way. And that is that if they think that this person is no longer human or no longer worthy of human appreciation, it can even come to the point of murder. And this happens so frequently in our daily life. There's some people that have been demonized to such a point that some people don't even associate them with humanity anymore. And the examples that have been brought up, well, again, in the book would be Osama bin Laden and Adolf Hitler. Some people just associate those names with some type of evil. And what a serial killer tends to do is to find a person or a group of people that they believe are outside the parameters of acceptability, that this person is expendable to the human race. And with some serial killers, he might even be everyone who isn't them. Everything that you see in the Zodiac killer's writings indicates that he thought that way, that these are types of people that are just beneath him. The Zodiac is talking about this very clearly, like again in the 408 cipher, that he wants to hunt people like wild game in the forest because man is the most dangerous animal of all. Okay, the exact line is, killing people is more fun than hunting wild game in the forest because he's the most dangerous animal of all. He's saying that he is above other people. He's also trying to use Mount Diablo as a central point in his other letters, talking about to solve his ciphers, you need to put angles on top of Mount Diablo, on top of Devil's Mountain. He's even above the devil and so on. The Zodiac is absolutely full of himself, or at the very least, the persona that has been created is full of himself. But with other types of serial killers, you can just see certain behaviors that are a little bit different. For example, with Jack the Ripper, most people believe that he didn't have some type of animosity toward everyone, or he didn't believe that everyone was inferior to him. They believe that Jack the Ripper had animosity toward women. With Ted Bundy, they believe that he had animosity toward women, partnered with some types of bizarre sexual urges. Then you have other types of serial killers like David Meyerhofer, the Montana child killer, whom I've discussed on a previous Zodiac Killer News report because he's an alternative Zodiac suspect. And he was someone who was a revenge killer. He was convicted for murdering 4 people, and he had specific reasons why he chose the targets that he did. It didn't matter if it was a personal form of revenge or not. For example, he killed a Boy Scout because he felt that he had been rejected by the Boy Scout troop years ago when he was younger, and when he was an adult, he murdered a boy from the Boy Scout troop. He had a reason for doing it, but the victim was, well, he was almost indifferent to which victim he targeted. It was all about the motive, and this heavily ties back to the concept of control. I'm reminded of the movie Chicago Massacre, which is all about Richard Speck and the South Chicago incident where 8 nurses were murdered in one night. And in that movie, somebody starts choking Richard Speck when he's in the hospital and just calling him a terrible person, and his arms are handcuffed to the hospital bed so he can't fight back. And then he just starts screaming, "If you want to fight me, fight fair. If you want to fight me, fight fair." He was in a position when he wasn't in control of things. And I know that's a dramatization, but that's the point that was meant to be illustrated. When someone who has homicidal tendencies and sociopathic tendencies is in a situation when they aren't in control of things, they can freak out, they can lose control. And it brings back these types of powerless feelings that they had when they were younger. I often cite Dr. Julie Armstrong, who talked about this very clearly when she said that a serial killer wants someone to feel powerless because they felt powerless when they were younger. They want someone to feel fear because they felt fear when they were younger. They want someone to feel terrorized because they felt terrorized when they were younger. Now, here are some interesting things about terror that are found in the book The Sociopath Next Door by Dr. Martha Stout. She states that it's quite unlikely that a schizophrenic would go on to become a terrorist because schizophrenics are not mentally organized. Now, this is very important to the Zodiac Killer mystery because I believe wholeheartedly that the Zodiac was not only a serial killer, but also a terrorist. Think about everything that I said. He's writing letters, making threats, saying that he's going to attack school buses. That's domestic terrorism. The Zodiac was a terrorist and a serial killer. But some of the most famous Zodiac killer suspects were also schizophrenics. Ross Sullivan, Richard Gaikowski, and even Ted Kaczynski. All right, it's already over there. Can schizophrenics be terrorists? Yes, absolutely. And to Dr. Martha Stout's credit, she only said schizophrenics are rarely terrorists. And Ted Kaczynski was a schizophrenic, and he was also a domestic terrorist. He went on to become the Unabomber. He is the Zodiac killer suspect that is entertained by a lot of people. But I just think that goes to show that people do not fit into these types of boxes. People do not fit into these types of labels. And if you go back to some of the older episodes of Black Box Online Radio from 2019, you'll hear me saying stuff like, oh, well, serial killers operate within a pattern, right? They follow a pattern of behavior. No, absolutely not. I mean, well, a domestic terrorist couldn't have this type of mental state. Absolutely not. Those types of things happen all the time. And I think that it's very difficult to compartmentalize illegal and deviant behavior because human beings are just so different. So, in conclusion, Jack the Ripper and Ted Bundy hated women. David Meyerhofer, the Montana child killer, hated certain people and groups of people. And the Zodiac killer hated everyone. I'm not even joking. And the final thing that I'd like to share with you guys here on the Zodiac Killer News Report relates to a serial killer that is another alternative Zodiac suspect, and his name is Dennis Rader. And there was a news article that just came out a couple days ago talking about a possible BTK victim. Yes, Dennis Rader was BTK, bind, torture, kill, and he is the subject of the book Zodiac Settling the Score by Kimberly McGath, which I've talked about on some recent Zodiac news reports. And there has been a very big breakthrough in one of his cases, and I'm just going to read that here. This is actually from theindependent.co.uk. Dennis Rader had been a potential suspect in the 1990 murder of Shauna Garber, but there's been a big breakthrough in that case. A decades-old cold case in Missouri that was long believed to have been committed by the serial killer Dennis Rader has been solved, and investigators say that he is not the suspect. Dennis Rader, who referred to himself as BTK, is behind bars for the slayings of at least 10 women and had been a potential suspect in the 1990 murder of Shauna Garber. I know I have to jump in right there. BTK was also a serial killer who targeted men, women, children. I mean, he didn't only murder women, and he did it all in his first night, allegedly, if that was indeed his first murder. The Otero quadruple homicide, 4 people were reportedly killed in BTK's first crime, and they were male, female, adults, and children. It was a family annihilation, if I'm using the term correctly. Now, but neither man, okay, actually, I got to go back to one sentence. Larry Hall, another suspect, was also serving time in prison, but neither man is believed to have killed 22-year-old Shauna Garber. At a press conference this week, the sheriff's office identified an individual named Talfay Reeves as a suspect. Reeves died in November of 2021, which essentially closes the case. On Halloween night in 1990, Reeves picked up Shauna Garber along Highway 59 in Missouri, hog-tied her by bounding her wrists and feet, and drove her to an abandoned farmhouse where it is believed that he sexually assaulted her and overdosed her with drugs, according to the investigators. He raped her and bound her and overdosed her to shut her up, so the screaming was so loud that it began to scare him in that valley because it echoed, the lead investigator Lori Howard said. Her body was found in the farmhouse 2 months after her death, but from 1990 until 2021, she was simply known as Grace Doe. It wasn't until March of 2021 that technology advancements helped investigators determine a familial match and that Shauna Garber was positively identified. The manner of her death and the fact that she was hogtied led them to question Dennis Rader in the murder. Now, you got to do a lot more than just saying hog tying, because if we look at the Zodiac murders, we have the Zodiac killer hog tying the victims at Lake Berryessa, and then we have the Santa Rosa hitchhiker slayings where victims are also hog tied, but I absolutely do not believe that those crimes are connected. And this is another reason, though, why people think that BTK was the Zodiac, because he hog tied victims, or he was about binding, torturing, and killing. And they think that the Zodiac crimes were a precursor to the more advanced BTK murders. And again, I'll state very clearly, BTK didn't murder Shauna Garber. This was a different sick individual, and it just goes to show that there are a hell of a lot more out there. Or I should say a hell of a lot more down there. The BTK killer stands for bind, torture, kill. He is now 78 years old, and he confessed to 10 murders and remains in prison. He waived his right to remain silent and spoke with investigators at length, denying involvement in other slayings. And when I was reading that, I have to go back to the Otero quadruple homicide, when I said in the past that I absolutely didn't think that that was the guy's first murder, starting out with murdering 4 people in one night, and that's how he became a serial killer. But BTK denies involvement in all other murders other than the ones that are known. While considered a suspect, Detective Howard pointed out that Reeves had always been a suspect. That's Talfay Reeves. He raped her, and we now know that because we had a witness who was terrified in 2010, 15, and 17 to talk, but eventually all 6 sources came forward without knowing what happened to each individual. No one knows what the other one was saying and how that happened. Shauna had been in foster care during her childhood, and her family lost contact with her. Her half-sister Danielle Pixel told that to the news. Shauna had a hard life, says Fox News Digital. She was born in a car, set on fire by her mother, had a failed adoption, and was in and out of foster care, then met the devil and was killed in such a horrific manner. Oh my gosh, rest in peace to Shauna Garber. I can't even begin to imagine what that stuff would have been like. There are pictures of her as a child, but none as an adult. A facial reconstruction was created by the artist Victoria Liewood, and that shows what she is believed to have looked like when she died. Miss Pixler will still continue to look for answers. I refuse to let her be invisible. And one more time, rest in peace to Sean, as well as all of the other murder victims that have been discussed in this one, including Dana Stidum. And right now, I'm going to turn it over to you guys. What do you think about the suspects that have been discussed in this episode? Arthur Lee Allen, Mike Klein, the new Zodiac killer suspect, BTK, Dennis Rader. And if you have any additional observations about serial killers, you can put them in the comments section down below. I would love to know what you guys think. And anybody can write the show at BlackBoxOnlineRadio at AOL.com. You can also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook is in the description box. And there was always BlackBoxNed88 over on Instagram. And as stated in the beginning, I did have some things to share with you about the White Horse Killer saga. In 2020, I wrote the book Killer on a White Horse, a story of the Evening Watchman. The sequel story is called The Barry Albert Tapes, and it was part of the book Down the Dark Lane, and that sequel story is included in both playlists for Killer on a White Horse and Down the Dark Lane. The audiobooks for those have both been completed, and we are closer and closer to the release of the third story in the White Horse Killer saga called White Horse Strong, which will be a YouTube exclusive available here on YouTube for free. Now, if you truly want to read an e-copy of the book, I can send you the script as like a PDF. Again, 100% for free. You don't have to pay any money for it. I also want to share that I created the cover for White Horse Strong, and if you look in the center, you can see the 2 main characters, Barry and Joanna, and that's just a stock image from Google, but once I actually put it together with the colors and the title, there was just a surreal experience actually watching characters come to life for the first time. And I'm definitely looking forward to recording the next story in the White Horse Killer saga, White Horse Strong, and I hope you guys will check it out. You can always hit the like button and subscribe if you want to follow along with these true crime discussions as well as the stories. But also, the final thing to say is that Astro Psych 400 is now back online. For a while, I had a secondary channel called Astro Psych 400, and it's now up and running again, putting it out at least 1 episode a week. All kinds of content going on over there. You can like and subscribe to that one too if you're curious. And as for me, I'll just say goodbye.